Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Cartoon Pad. I'm really looking forward to this episode. We have a special guest. Michael, how are you?
I'm fine. Bob, how are you?
Good. And trusty producer Marty is in the air. Marty, how are you?
I am good. I am in sunny Florida, South Florida, just on the beach. I came up from the beach.
Hi, Marty.
And set up my microphone that I trucked all the way down here in the event that we had pond sandy and covered in copper tone. But I'm ready to go. I'm ready to talk about cartoons.
I suggest we dive right in, and let's bring our guest in. Michael, I'm going to give you the honors of welcoming our next guest.
Sure. I was just about to say that Marty even sounds tan.
That is from Fran Lebowitz.
I just made that up. Hey,
No.
Who is that?
In her book, she said, "You sound audibly tan." Can't remember the essay. But she's one of Thurber's greatest flag bearers.
That's good to know, because the person talking to us at this moment is a noted American poet, artist, scholar, author, editor, illustrator, essayist, dog lover, and enthusiastic ornithologist. He's been cajoled into joining us primarily because of his impressive efforts as the editor and scholar of humor and cartooning, particularly of one James Thurber. So let's all welcome Mr. Michael J. Rosen.
Thank you. I'm totally honored to be among the crew here.
So, Bob, you'd like to start us off on a moment of tribute, and I think it's only appropriate that it be led.
Well, I was just saying that what's appropriate is that Michael, he seems to have done everything. And one of the things he has done is studied animal behavior. And the first thing I think of when I think of the great Ed Koren, who just passed away last week, is how he turned his furry animals and depicted our human faults and all our different foibles. And he was able to humanize this whole world. And he was amazing, Ed. Michael, I know you don't know Ed personally, but chime in about animal behavior here. Are you familiar with his cartoons?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, his shagginess, and I really do think it's a sort of hirsute world that he lived in, where I genuinely feel he recognized the animal nature in humans, that, we can put on all the pretensions we want, but I think that Ed and Thurber, in a great extent, saw the natural world as much more exuberant than just our pettiness and commercial longings.
No, well said. He was a really great guy, too. He was a very sweet man. I worked with him on a couple of projects, and we did some talks together. And he always had this great gift for being able to see how we could take something and we could turn it on its head and then turn it into something very funny at the same time. It's one thing to have like an observation about human behavior, but then to make it hysterical is something else. And when I was editing books, I was working for a publisher called Princeton Architectural Press, and I had the job of cartoon editor for a group of books. And at that time, I was seeing thousands of submissions from different cartoonists, and it was a very telling process because people would send me all these large batches, and I would see their sketches. And I would see then who was really talented and some people who maybe were not at the same level as someone like Ed. Ed would send in these batches of sketches. It seemed like every single sketch was a home run. And it was just amazing. I mean, there's a lot of people who also fell into that category and made me feel like I was a total amateur as I saw all these big batches. And actually, my co-host, Michael, was one of the people who would send me in these batches, and it was difficult to choose which of the cartoons I was going to include of his as well in the books. And then other people...
Bob, stop. Just stop.
But it was a very telling thing. And, that those books, by the way, were done by invite. What I did was, it was sort of a vanity project in which I had people who I knew personally and people whose work I really appreciated, and people who I felt I could deal with on a business level, because I would be dealing with all these different entanglements. And so it wasn't an open call for those who was wondering if why I didn't invite them. It was more of a personal project. And I did know Ed at that time, and I did know that Ed was a total gentleman. And so it was great to have the honor to know him. And I think that's...
Bobby's a very nice guy, and we were on a panel together, you and me and Ed.
Yeah.
And he was talking like at the Rockwell Museum.
The Norman Rockwell Museum.
Yes. And he was talking about what a joy cartooning was and what a privilege, and how he just felt blessed every time he could draw a cartoon. And I said, no, cartooning is torture. It's hell. That's where humor comes from. Torture and hell. And he said, why are you here? Please, could I have security? Anyway, his style, I found his style very itchy, but his content very benign. So there was a real kind of not a disconnect, but a conflict with his very frenetic kind of look, but his very kindly approach to humor.
Yeah, you just introduced a different world where people can get excited about something they hadn't seen before. Mr. Rosen, do you think that would be the case with James Thurber when he first came on the scene, as being someone whose style was so unfamiliar with people that they were feeling like they were getting in on the latest thing?
Oh, there's so many ways to approach that. First, I do have to say, inimitable, I would apply to Edward Corn. You turn the page of the New Yorker, you'd know it was his, you'd run to it and read the caption. George Booth, the late, great George Booth, another animal person. You would see the line and you would anticipate, what did that loony family and those cats and dogs proliferate this week? Thurber, I think I feel it's always my duty to say, before Thurber, there was only great draftsmanship. Cartoons in the New Yorker prior to Thurber were well drawn. They were handsomely executed. They were done by people who were schooled. They intended to do a cartoon, whereas Thurber didn't really intend to. He had this notion of pre-intentional. I don't know what I'm drawing. I'm just kind of drawing. His idol, his bodily cranial idol was very high. So he was writing and drawing partly because he had a photographic memory, all the time, without the idea that I'm going to refine what I'm doing. I'm going to sketch, and then I'm going to ink. He basically, came out of the gate as himself. And it's also important to remember that at the time, most people submitted images, and the cartoon committee, the art committee, would banter about possible captions. So it wasn't a cartoonist submitting a finished cartoon to an editor who would say, I like it, I'll publish it. It was more a rapport or an ongoing exchange that was required. And when Thurber first started publishing, he received thousands of letters, care of the New Yorker, and Harold Ross insisted that he answer all of them. And the gist of each and every one was, why are you publishing the mad work of this man? My granddaughter can do this. And Thurber would answer with a variation on, yes, she could, but she hasn't been through as much. And that sounds just like a glib answer. But Mr. Shaw alluded to that, in that there is something that's required to be able to get you to spring forward into humor. There's no spring in the board unless there's some give, some loss, some frustration. And I think Thurber is in the same breath as Duchamp or Kandinsky or Andy Warhol. People saw work and said, what? Why is this good? Why is this art? Why is this cartooning? I mean, he can't even draw. Dorothy Parker would say he's drawing cookies. He's drawing unbaked cookies.
Half-baked cookies.
Half-baked cookies.
Please. No, I want to say before Thurber, the New Yorker cartoons all had something fairly in common in that they weren't funny. They were old school. They were kind of labored. And I think Arno was the real puncher of the group. And he was a great draft, but Thurber kind of fell out of the sky like Mr. Bean of cartooning. I mean, he was a nervous doodler. And then I saw this picture of him and E.B. White in a office the size of a closet. And
yes,
Thurber has filled every nook and cranny with a dog because he needs something to do while he's smoking, and it's too early to drink. So here goes Thurber, and he's just drawing shit. He doesn't care. Dog, cat, angel. And then here's E.B. White picking them up and inking them while he's not looking and submitting them. So there's this whole little narrative I have in my head of how Thurber was born, his birth.
Perfectly said. I mean, Thurber would steal notepads from the other folks in the New Yorker office, or would fill them up with drawings so that when they take off the top page to make a note, there were already drawings there. But you're right to say Thurber not only released the art form of the cartoon from formality, premeditation, and training into something more spontaneous, or he liked the word pre-intentional. But your point is the style of earlier New Yorker cartoons was either a sort of banal dialogue, he says this, she says that, or one of them, and I have the book of that accompanied the exhibit that I curated at the Columbus Museum of Art, A Mile and a Half of Lines. And there's a cartoon of two women in a cab looking out the window by Leonard Dove from 28. And the comment is, I think this New York traffic is terrible. If this had been in any other city, we would have been at Times Square long before now.
I chortled at that one.
It's something of a chortle, isn't it?
I chortled.
Well, but as you're saying, Carl Rose started to veer away from that, and Thurber, for the most part, there are one-liners. One person is speaking, and it's in some ways an unexpected observation, and that it's partly that because he would draw, just as you say, continuously. And then he would sort of look and say, well, what have I drawn here? I was trying to do a couch and it turned into a bookcase. I thought this was a staircase, but now my favorite one is I think if I can remember the caption here.
Is it the woman on the bookcase?
Well, there's the woman on the bookcase.
Oh, okay. I was trying to do a mind meld.
But I was thinking of there's a man in the bar and he drew the legs too short, so he drew another man underneath and the person next to him is saying something like, "You and your horsey can." I've had enough of you and your horsey. Just that idea that the humor came from the predicament, not from the conceptualization.
But Michael, was it also because he was being unpredictable? Was he the first cartoonist whose setup had the humor coming from the fact that there was sort of a surprise and there was some kind of juxtaposition of objects that don't quite usually go together? So there was that, because that's where laughter comes from sometimes now, where you're unpredictable and you expect something and then boom, there's a curveball.
He definitely enjoyed the idea of misalignment. And, I mean, it's also important to remember that Thurber jumped into the world at a moment that right now we can't even imagine any naivety around. For example, nudism, sexual openness, Jung, and the idea of the id. Remember that this was Prohibition and the Depression and between the wars, and so trying to make light in that moment was a daunting, if not daunting, a dampening. Alcohol and socializing. I mean, that's what you did. You went to a cocktail party, you went to a dinner, you went to a speakeasy, and women weren't necessarily at the speakeasy. So the idea of the Thurber cartoons where there are men, it's almost hard for us to understand the humor involved when
Yes.
Thurber introduced a lady into a bar scene. That irrespective of the caption was
Let's not forget he was a half blind alcoholic with a touchy thyroid.
well, that the thyroid wasn't always the case, but when he started at the New Yorker, he saw perfectly well, in the sense that the one eye that wasn't damaged by the arrow, as a youngster, allowed him to have handwriting that was legible, and he could use the typewriter, and he could draw what he wanted to draw. It's as the progressive deterioration of the other eye occurred between 40 and 51 that he lost the ability to compose on the typewriter, to compose legibly, and we can trace the decline of his sight by looking at letters. Now, of course, he dictated to his secretary or to his wife, Helen, but his manuscripts were primarily, or until the end, he still tried to cram words in pencil on a yellow page. And you can document 25 words per page, 100 words per page, 25 words per page, 12 words per page. And he would like to say that only Helen and one of his, long-suffering secretaries could actually read the documents. And likewise, he began to require aids to draw. He wore a Zeiss loop to magnify. He tried.
I have one right here.
Sword. Oh no, that's an alcohol-related purchase there.
That's a martini shaker. All right. He also had a fabulous memory, I think, that people don't. I mean, that's legendary.
Photographic. He could be at a party and his wife would tell him, "Thurber, stop writing," and he would be able to dictate. He says 2,000 words, which was basically 8 pages with all of the punctuation at a sitting. He used to call his mind a whore's top drawer.
I love that.
I don't actually know what's in a whore's top drawer, but
I can tell you.
Oh, okay.
Whore stuff. Whores have lots of stuff.
But he relied on that in a way that many others would have been perplexed, ended. They wouldn't have had a means of composition. So I think that, too, as you point out, is remarkable. And it's also the reason that Thurber failed to produce one big lasting work. And he was baleful about this his entire life. He tried some novels. He tried other plays. And when people say that Thurber has not held in the canon the way some others have, it's mainly because there was never one great work that would allow scholars to and biographers to really hold to that. And humor, as all of us here know, maybe not our producer Marty, but humor is not held to the same high standards of awards and book sales and so forth. That said, in the 40s, Thurber was the best known, most read American author in the world.
I just want to interject right now that Marty Dundix is the American standard for immaturity, and he holds that.
Okay.
He holds that standard high.
But he has a publishing program that I saw that. So I apologize for even suggesting otherwise.
That's all right. Apology
not at all.
accepted.
Everything's fine.
No, we love seeing him get insulted.
So I didn't realize that he wrote The Secret Life.
All right, Marty, you can leave. You can leave now. Go get in the car.
That's the only thing that people.
That's what put it. Isn't that what put him over the top financially?
It's a great story. It's a great story. It's been adapted so many times.
You know, one of my little litmus tests as I've grown older, I started when the Thurber house, where James Thurber lived from 1914 to 1917 during his college years, we began restoring that. I had come from Columbia University with my poetry degree and all the money that conferred upon me, Bob, and began work as an illustrator for the Thurber House. My first job was doing their signage and their logo and their programs. Long story short, I didn't know much about Thurber, but that became my particular job. But at that moment, Thurber had only been dead 20 years, and he was still very much in the conversation. And over the 20 years that I spent there, and now it's 20 more years since I haven't been there, Thurber is not known to not just this generation, but the previous generation. And I find myself, I've had cataract surgery in both of my eyes and a bunch of, so when I go and I get the nice tech who wants to, let me read the numbers, I can't help but say, do you know who James Thurber is? And they're going, no. Well, and I explained who he is. And then I said, well, one of my favorite cartoons of his is a man with a pointer pointing at the letters on a chart, and an elderly woman with a little bun sitting on a chair 20 feet away. And the caption is, of course I can read that. It's 7 H's and a seahorse. Oh, and they all kind of like go, oh.
Okay, I have to ask a question, Mr. Rosen. When did you contract Thurberitis? So did you know anything about it when you applied to the Thurber house? I'm kind of fascinated by how this all unfolds.
I knew what a general person growing up in the 60s and 70s would have read. We read a few stories. We read a few fables. I'm not sure I saw cartoons. My parents were not literary people. We, in Columbus, Ohio, where Thurber lived, we did not subscribe to the New Yorker or any other magazine for that matter. And so when I came to the Thurber house, I came to be on a grant to be their design consultant. I had been publishing illustrations in the New Yorker, not cartoons, just spots that were very popular in the, in part of their history. I think they do very few now. But while I was at Columbia, I started drawing and dropped off a portfolio of illustrations, not thinking myself any sort of Thurber or cartoonist.
To the art director?
To the art director.
Who was that?
A lady.
A lady. Do you know
lady?
Please.
Can't say her name.
Don't say it.
I can't remember.
It's in the horse. We'll keep that in the horse top drawer. Don't worry.
Okay. But I was shocked that I dropped off, and immediately the same day I dropped off work at Gourmet magazine, and both of them bought drawings. And I thought, okay, this is how I'm going to support myself, since poetry did not come with money.
So you never had a go at cartooning?
Never.
Wow.
I mean, I think of humor as a mainstream in my life. My father, in particular, we told jokes at the dinner table. We didn't talk politics. I don't think we even knew that there was such a thing as politics. We didn't discuss, homework and how was work, Dad? Because Dad was a controller for an auto parts chain. So I don't think he would have had anything he could have said like, well, brake shoes were really up on the brake shoes this week. I mean, so he told jokes and he had accents, and we would be excited if we heard a joke at school to come and tell. And inevitably the linchpin would be, we'd do one sentence and Dad would go, uh-huh. I said, oh, have you heard this one? No. And then we tell the joke and the answer was, well, I heard a little different. Of course he knew it. And the segue to that is simply that humor has been a vital part of my worldview. And I think Thurber took over for my father in many ways, in that he was a night blooming monologuist, according to one of his friends. Given a couple, drinks and an attentive crowd, he would hold forth, and he minted his stories. So not just the my life and hard times kinds of stories, which are a perfect product of that mentality, but he would hold forth, and many times he would redraw a cartoon called Thurber and Company, where Thurber has his hands above his head, disheveled sort of hair, pontificating, and everybody else, is sort of sleeping or nodding off. And that has to do with his photographic memory and his ability to hear voices. His mother was he often attributed his mother to his comedic sense. She often did antic things in the neighborhood, pranks and quirky things. He documented one of them in his book, the Thurber album, maybe my favorite, being a dog person, where Aunt Marjorie didn't care for dogs at all. And so prior to her visit, she rounded up the neighborhood dogs and put them in the basement, and then asked Aunt to, could you call the dog and have him come up for call Rex and have him come up for dinner. And she's, squealing that she's being mobbed by, a rush of dogs, just as a wrongdoing.
I had a question. Yeah. Talk to me.
I just want to interject that so people know that Michael has written A Mile and a Half Lines, The Art of James Thurber. So we're going to discuss your other books, but I do want to mention that one of is it not your last book that you did was about James Thurber?
I can never remember how to do it. What's 100 plus 25? Sesquipencentennial, whatever it is.
Susquehannas.
Yeah.
That's Algonquin. I'm sorry. So for the podcast audience at home, I am holding Mr. Rosen's book, which is fabulous. And he's how many Thurber pieces have you edited as far as books?
There are 6 books of James Thurber's either uncollected or unpublished works. So when I came on board with the Thurber House, I metamorphosed from their designer into their sort of literary program person, because I was primarily a writer, and we began to conceptualize programs. Columbus, Ohio, at the time, 1982, there was no such thing as going to hear an author read. There were no readings. You didn't think of that as a cultural event like the ballet or going to the symphony. If you were going to hear someone read, it would be in the basement of Denny Hall at OSU, and you would be a student, and it would, and there would be cookies afterwards. We and bookstores likewise weren't hosting events. Bookstores were just bookstores where you got books. And so we conceptualized a writer in residence program, an evenings with authors, we called it. And we focused on humor, but we also focused on nationally known writers that were available to come and speak. So we cultivated the taste by which we wanted to be appreciated. So I met the Thurber family, who were both donors and of course avid supporters of the institution. And over the first couple of years, I began to look at the Thurber works in the personal archive of his daughter, Rosemary Thurber. And I think in 1989, we pulled together what I felt were the most interesting pieces about Thurber. So there was no real fiction. There were cartoons, but they were primarily his personal essays and his humor that had to do with the writing life, the life in theater, the life of cartooning. My editor at HarperCollins felt that we really needed, that kind of spring back into publishing Thurber. Was
that collecting himself?
That was collecting himself.
That's okay, sir. That is a great book.
It has some really marvelous insights into the cartooning process of the New Yorker, the art committee, the editing process of the New Yorker, and it was. The New Yorker was always sort of its own thing. The way that they went about, editing and soliciting articles and paying authors and keeping people on retainer with money. And so that was, Thurber wasn't always a best loved person. In fact, much of his grief came as the regimes changed, and he was not publishing as frequently and was not writing things that, say, William Shawn or the other guys might have been selected.
No, it was interesting because I don't think people appreciate there was the holy trinity of Thurber, White, and Parker, and then there was Harold Ross. And Thurber was hired to be the general manager. He was supposed to be Ross's next Jesus. And he was supposed to run the magazine. And he could not do that to save his life. And then Harold Ross said, I'm going to do my Harold, just get in there with White and start writing. And, then he became a writer. But he was supposed to be an editor at the beginning.
Yes, he met E.B. White. White introduced him to Ross. Ross said he needed a managing editor. And Thurber said he worked his way down to a writer.
Right.
And, Thurber's constitution, I can't imagine being thought of as managerial.
The funny thing was, and he didn't give a rat's ass because he would go in and approve his own cartoons because Ross was such a stickler, but he'd go in and forge Ross's okay on his own cartoons to get them published, which think about that happening now at the New Yorker.
How long did that last when he was doing that?
Now, well, 1 year, his best year, he had 43 cartoons published in 1 year. Think about that in the New Yorker.
Yeah.
I always thought there was the trait of courage for him to do a style that was so against the grain. Michael, do you think that's the case, that that's one of his traits, is to be brave and to kind of break the mold?
I don't feel it was ever intentional. I think it was accidental. And then I think he was, Althea, his first wife, was definitely, a motivation to achieve. And I know he felt the competitiveness from doing small works. There was an ongoing diatribe, but maybe that's too nice of a word, between Thurber and some of the more literary figures of the time.
It wasn't Thomas Mann. It was one of the great drunken authors. It wasn't Hemingway. So he hung out with F. Scott one night. Oh, hell. Who wrote Help of Time in the River? We're having quiz now.
Oh, God, brain, come on. We got to be able to do this.
We need an older producer.
To the Googles.
Check this.
It was Bob Eckstein.
Yeah.
No. Thomas Wolfe.
Thomas Wolfe. I think my
Thomas
Wolfe and Thomas.
Who was a gigantic figure. And actually, the sun behind you, Mr. Shaw, has now turned you into
my
explosion of a nova. It's beautiful.
It's my
it's great.
My nether eye.
So I don't think Thurber was brave I don't think there was a will to do it. I think there was, now that this is caught on, I need to do it. I mean, he was definitely someone who was looking for not accreditation as much as just he had ambition.
Yeah.
He wanted to achieve.
Yeah. What was his favorite creative discipline? Was it cartooning, or he'd rather do short stories? What was his comfort zone?
He would say that he was a writer who relaxed by drawing, that the drawing was, easier for him. He didn't have to revise and labor. He was a genuine wordsmith, as was E.B. White. He would, agonize with the little crucible to get that one adjective the way that it was supposed to be. I mean, the reason I feel that so much of Thurber's work is still so readable and not quaint. Now, of course, you could say the role of men and women is vastly different, or you could say, the emphasis on whether it's economics or fashion, we're in a completely different world. And people have often asked me, what would Thurber write about now? And all I can ever think of is, well, whatever is fractious, whatever is causing us irritation, and he would that would be the source. So I think that his writing was not labored as in belabored, but was a genuine labor, whereas drawing was infelicity. That's the wrong word. It was, a flight of caprice. It was
almost unconscious and or spontaneous, as his writing was, I would say, polished to the point of labored. And I think it was interesting that E.B. White thought he was a better cartoonist than a writer, though I doubt he would say that to his face.
Just keeping, for those keeping score at home, Mr. Thurber would be 129 years old if he was observing on the activities of this week and submitting daily cartoons. It would be interesting.
At one point, I did sort of hazard a list of things. It was for a magazine, and now I can't remember what I had said. But, it would have been just those things that stick in our craw, today. Liza Donnelly just posted on Instagram, I'm not sure if it's in the New Yorker or not, a little kid coming in from the bedroom with a teddy bear, and the parents are sitting there. And he says, I think there are pundits under my bed. And
that's very good.
And the idea, that we are being terrified and troubled by access to facts and by the purveyors of our news, which that was genuinely a Thurber topic. How language has disintegrated, how society has succumbed to the proliferation of naysayers and truth twisters. I mean, these were things. He was on the House Un-American Activities Committee. He was, not on it. He was on the list of the McCarthy. So he was very involved in a way in the atmosphere of trouble that our language and the people who use language put us.
He could also be very recalcitrant when he wanted to be and really dig in his heels. And did he refuse his honorary PhD from Ohio State the first time it was offered? I mean, even though
Yes, he did. He did.
he really did stand on some principles.
What was the reason, Michael?
He was. There was a restriction of free speech that the university had put in place, that it wasn't going to allow certain kind of speakers, and he believed that that was. I mean, I could find the passage, but lest I take the time, he just felt that no one should be quelled from their presentation of ideas. He felt that humor was a flag that should be flown at all times, and he walked away from the opportunity.
This was probably during the 50s too, which is probably the most conservative decade in American history. So he was really fighting a tide at that point.
But yet he could be a matchmaker. Eliza Donnelly and Michael were brought together for their admiration of James Thurber. It's what brought them together, and they're a married couple of New Yorker cartoonists.
They are indeed. They are in 1.5 miles of lines, each speaking of their love of Thurber. I should also say the late Danny Shanahan came to the Thurber house, drew many pictures while sleeping in Thurber's bed of the escapades that took place at 77 Jefferson Avenue, the night the ghost got in, the night the bed fell, the alarms that were heard in the night, the fixtures that leaked electricity. You know, he has a little charwoman with little lightning bolts on the floor of the house, sweeping them into a dustpan.
Let me just clarify. You're suggesting that the Thurber house is haunted?
It is haunted. I was there. I spent the night. I could tell you things.
Anywhere where you sleep is haunted, Michael.
Okay. I woke up with a big dog bite on my ass.
Again?
Yes, again. And I didn't pay for it. And it doesn't Rex the dog, the spirit of Rex, roams the Thurber house.
Others say it was a murderer who chased people around the dining room table.
Yes.
Amy Tan was one of our guests, and she brought her Yorkie, and she claimed that the dogs were barking while she was sleeping because there was something that was spooking them. I mean, during the 20 years I was there, we had some 200 writers sleep in Thurber's tiny single bed.
At once?
And, wait. No, spread out. And Fran Lebowitz, mentioned earlier, had stayed there and, of course, had to make a total stink that she wasn't permitted to smoke. Which she said Thurber smoked all his entire life. And I said, look, I know it's just, this is a house on the National Register of Historic Places, and we can't have smoking. And later, both in person and in print, she wrote, yeah, and I smoked in the Thurber house. It gave me such a sense of connection to the great writer. And it's like, oh.
So I have to say that I've been to the Thurber house a number of times, and I think everyone needs to put that on their cartoonist bucket list. And I don't even believe in bucket lists. So the Thurber house is worth the trip.
There's a bucket list right behind you, Michael. I see it on the wall.
Oh, there it is. So the history of the house is interesting, too, because wasn't it a mental asylum at one time? Did I read that, or did I just make that up?
Let me think. I think you made it up.
Okay, good.
No, it was... it was,
or a hospital or something.
I say we leave it in.
The house itself was a modest Victorian, but decorated in a style that was middle class, eclectic. 19.
Lots of flocking
on the wallpaper.
They flocked all over the place, Bob. I'm telling you, man. There was some flocking going down.
No, I agree with you. People have to go there, and also the Columbus Museum. Michael, we're going to get to your own publishing in a moment, but the book I'm working on right now, called The Most Fascinating Museums, I would love to include you, as I just finished painting Columbus Museum. And I would love to include one of your stories as I collect different stories from people. And yeah, I mean, where am I going with this? I want to know more about your own publishing too, as you've published over 150 books. And yeah, I just want to hear more about that too, if we can. I don't even know where to begin. Wherever you would like.
I'm rather dizzying in that regard. The Thurber House is a stone's throw from the Columbus Museum of Art. That's for starters. And the Thurber Prize, which I take particular pride in, is the nation's highest honor for humor writing. And that was meant to be something that was on par with a Tony and an Oscar. And it was in the era when there were honors for the best short story anthology, the best cookbooks of the year. Where was the best humor of the year? And so I convinced our board of directors that we could have this. And during my time there, The Onion and David Sedaris and Ian Fraser received the award, and it's continued to this day in a somewhat different form. But my opportunities, I mentioned that because my opportunities at the Thurber House were extraordinary. They gave me leeway to, unfurl the jib sheets and hoist the whatevers and go into various territories. So we, inspired by Thurber, did exhibits of a variety of artists, everyone from Seymour Quast and Milton Glaser and Ed Koren, doing pictures of dogs that we would then auction and give the money to humane efforts. We were able to do shows of Edward Gorey and Mark Simont, one of James Thurber's illustrators. And while there, I said, we should do an anthology called the Thurber Anthology of Contemporary Humor. And HarperCollins bought the idea. And I thought I would grow old editing this beautiful anthology of, 600 pages of remarkable work, solicited, unsolicited, just open. Sure, it was tons of reading, but I loved it all. And we ended up calling the anthology Mirth of a Nation because, going back to an earlier point, the people in marketing and sales at HarperCollins said, I don't think people will know who James Thurber was. Like a bit of a blow, but we called it Mirth of a Nation. And then the third volume was called May Contain Nuts. And, they were published in a hefty, 1.5 inch thick paperback size. But humor doesn't, when it comes to what do we want to continue, where are our profits coming from? It wasn't from these important, I thought, books. But that's in some ways how my own writing career has evolved from springboards that the Thurber House allowed me. I did some anthologies about dogs, cats, and horses, many of whom tapped Thurber visiting writers. And my own degree from Columbia in poetry, not illustration, allowed me to do books, of poetry. And along the way, I've gone where opportunities have presented themselves. So that meant there have been cookbooks and there have been nonfiction books and lots of kids' books, many of which are humorous and spring from that well.
I have to add a pre-erratum here because Wikipedia has you stated with 150 or so books. Your personal bio lists about 80. So you have a doppelganger in England named Michael Rosen.
I know.
So you get confabulated together, let alone being confused with Michael J. Pollard, the late character actor. So, that's why you have the J. What does the J stand for, by the way? Jasper?
It's Joel. but ridiculously, Michael Rosen, English poet and kids book author, and I have mostly disambiguated, if that's a verb, ourselves. But there's Michael J. Rosen, whose highlights include Atlas of Abdominal Reconstruction.
I love that book.
I
That's
know.
great. That's a must read.
The cartoons are great.
It's a must read.
I heard that was up.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. So no, we go about our business, and I've had opportunities to do work helping people make books. For a brief 2-year period, I was able to do a humor imprint and published a couple remarkable books. Louis Grossberger, I'm not even sure what you would call him. A columnist, did a history of music. Francis Heaney did his remarkable book, The Holy Tango of Poetry, where he took a poet's name as an anagram and would come up with a title and then write a verse in that poet's name. And then the late Richard Thompson, the fabulous Washington Post cartoonist, we did a great book called excuse me, Poor Richard's Almanac.
Yeah, that's okay, Michael. Get yourself a drink. I could see you could use a drink. And I'll mention that Richard
You choked him up, Bob.
I know. Michael, I'll just fill in the dead space. Richard Thompson was one of my biggest inspirations for getting into illustration. I have his work right next to me here always to inspire me. I have his pieces laminated from when he used to work for the National Geographic. And he was amazing. And I was wondering if you worked with, well, there's a few people you mentioned really quickly. Did you do the book with John Cash? John Cash was a buddy of his who came out with a book about Richard as well. And I'm wondering if it's not the same book.
No, I did a book called Richard's Poor Almanac that MS Press, and if you don't have a copy, I would be thrilled to send it to you. And it was a collection of his sort of greatest hits, not in the series that he came to do later, but these were just individual cartoons like Signs of the Season or names of potholes, or I'm just trying to think of, I haven't looked at this in too long, but we met a few times, and this was before he was tragically diagnosed with multiple sclerosis.
It was MS. It was, yes.
Yeah, MS. And, the most, he really was the most, if you went into a coffee shop and you saw him sitting there, you wouldn't have said, this is the person with this outrageous cleverness. And his line work notwithstanding, he actually illustrated the book of Francis Heaney's Holy Tango of Poetry, doing portraits of Emily Dickinson and William Shakespeare and so on. Yeah. I just think his line and his, there's nothing Thurber-esque about it, but he was a great craftsman. He was amazing. Yes.
He did everything well. And when you mentioned if you ran into him at a coffee shop, the first thing you would notice is his smile. Like Ed Koren, he was such a gentle, welcoming man. And it was just, he's just one of those guys who just made such an impact on so many people.
He just said yes. I don't think he even realized when I first said, let's pull together and make a real book, he was rather blown away. Like, why would we want to do that? And it was lovely working with him, and he was so happy with the book. I'm so glad that subsequently another publisher was able to take that and so much of his other sustained cartoon work, with the serial work into, a kind of compendium.
Right. Michael, what are you working on now? You have any books on the oven?
Oddly, I have become friends with a 3-time shuttle astronaut, Catherine Sullivan, who is also, I've dubbed her the most vertical girl in the world. She has gone to the shuttle and she's gone to the Mariana Trench's deepest point.
Are you saying she gets around?
She gets around.
Okay.
And so we have a book coming out in June called How to Spacewalk. She's the first American woman to, open the hatch and go perform an extravehicular activity. And she is one of 8 people,
Wow.
the only woman who has gone to Challenger Deep, which is, the bottom of the bottom. So that's the book we're working on right now.
That sounds fantastic. What's the name of the book?
Well, the one now is called How to Spacewalk.
Okay.
And I illustrated it. And maybe a third of it are my illustrations, but most of them are NASA images, remarkable NASA images. So the editor asked me to kind of add a little more levity. So, for example, I have an illustration of how do you wash your hair in the shuttle? And so, if you have long hair, unlike me, your hair is standing straight up, and the water has to come out of a little squeeze bottle, that you apply, and the mist, that the droplets go up into the ventilator and get purified and turned into your drinking water. So, that's the kind of thing that I was able to do in drawing.
I hope the sequel is called The Bottom of the Bottom, because I cracked that open. Take a look.
Bottom of the bottom.
Bottom of the bottom. Okay, now you're working on another project where you're trying to discern the Thurber writings from the early Talk of the Towns where they were unattributed. I find that very fascinating.
There are, I hope I can persuade the estate to do this. Their first thought was, well, they're dated. And my response to that was, that's right. That's why they're interesting. But Thurber wrote both by himself and in conjunction with others there, whether it was, E.B. White or Harold Ross or,
Like Parker.
Not Dorothy. He didn't co-author anything with Dorothy Parker, but they were the talk of the town, and they were unassigned. Most of the time. Some of the time they were assigned. And there are humor pieces. There are observations. For example, he goes to a daffodil show. He meets Gertrude Stein. He runs into the person who is it's so funny to say this, that they're editing the telephone book, and there's apparently a competition to be the last name in the telephone book. And so there are these names like ZZY, GE or something, and then the next one is ZZZ, and then they have to the person he's interviewing is saying we have to authenticate that there's actually a person with that name and that they're not simply trying to be the last name.
Or are they falling asleep?
Right, their finger on the keyboard, just hitting the.
Well, I'm looking forward to that one.
Michael, will you approach the New Yorker with that project? Is that who you have to go to? And
the Thurber. The New Yorker is very open, I believe, this way, and that if Thurber wrote it, we have the rights to it. We, meaning the Thurber estate and myself as their journeyman. So I don't know that it's going to take off, but I think there's plenty about it that really is remarkable. And I should have prepared and found a piece that I could read from it that would just be perfect, but I didn't.
Well, we do
Bob, sorry. I want to read a quote from Michael's book, A Mile and a Half of Lines. It's by Thurber himself, and he used to draw on cardboard, which, think about that. He didn't care what he drew on. And he said, my rejected pictures were returned with a piece of brown cardboard that didn't hold its color, so that the top drawing arrived looking like a platter from which a cat had been eaten beef liver. What a beautiful quote. And it's probably covered in scotch stains, too. I'm just going to throw that out.
It always goes back to alcohol with you.
Me and Thurber, you know what they say, one Martini is perfect. 2 is too many, and 3 is not enough.
I would say that that was part of the culture he wrote in.
Yes.
There are plenty of scenes, both written and drawn, that are of gatherings, socializing, toasting, cordials.
Yes. They were the generation, they weren't the lost generation. They were the generation that stayed out too late.
Exactly. That is his words. Perfectly done.
And look where we are now. We're just the opposite. Not socializing.
Yeah.
Spent a couple of years
Staying home,
just everyone doing just the opposite. And this is what we get. We have you here, Michael, what do you think of the New Yorker in general? We'd love to hear your impressions of the magazine as a scholar. Have you seen it evolve?
Well, I've seen myself evolve more than I've seen the magazine evolve. I used to read it all, and then I used to read some, and then I used to look at the cartoons. Then I stopped because they would just, the covers would come and I would go, fabulous cover. And now I find that my own work and my own leisure, and I spend most of my time painting now and doing prints and collages, my mind can't take in those brilliant, beautiful, long, comprehensive articles. But as I look at the cartoons, since this is the topic, I do think that nothing could have happened without Thurber. He really opened the floodgate to the style. There are very few, and I say this in a non-critical way at all, most of the people drawing aren't trying to render. They're not trying to make a beautiful picture. There are some that are tighter than others, but they're more looser than ever. And I understand that it's really a singular editorial process where you submit image, caption, yes or no. And I've spent a good number of hours with Bob Mankoff, who had a different relationship, I think, with his team. And then, as I mentioned earlier, what I know from Thurber's time was a committee, a group of people who would decide, with Harold Ross being the final, they would decide on what might be included and what should the wording be. So there are many cartoons that I have from the Ohio State University's Thurber archive, where you can see an original caption and then crossed out a handwritten caption. And even then, a caption that appears later, finessed one more time.
Wow. I want to mention to everyone, if you want to see Michael's work, his prints and artwork is at michaeljrosen.com. I've been enjoying your work this afternoon. It's beautiful.
Thank you, sir.
And it's so much, your whole body of work is so impressive. And I'm going to go dip into some of your titles. And there's a couple of books that sound really interesting that I haven't had a chance to read. I'm going to go check out.
I think the same can be said for me. I feel like I'm meeting a whole group of people that I need to catch up on. But I love that part. I think one of the things Thurber would have written about, and I feel enough of a kindred soul, partly because I can't really see out of one of my eyes after the cataract surgery. So I've taken him to not exactly heart, but to, brain, is we do not experience enough in person, just limiting ourselves to Instagram and Facebook and TikTok and feeds and the card catalog and going into the library and seeing, yes, here's the book I was looking for, but look at this book next to it and look at all, oh my God, I had no idea. And so that rich repository of knowledge, I know we can use chat AI and any number of things, but the randomness that comes to us from an eagerness to learn, a curiosity to be surprised is so profound. And I see young people, oh my God, that sounded so old. I see young people like not even caring. Actually, I should say this by way of a closure. I went to a pizza place and got a salad for lunch today. And there was a big sign in the window that someone had handwritten, no senior tag. Mm-hmm. So I go get my salad and I say, are we saying that you don't want seniors, like people my age? And what is she said, well, we don't want seniors in here with their squirt guns and their super shooters.
Junior high school.
And I'm like, yes. So no, I'm not even there. I mean, in my head, I'm like, so you mean older people are coming in with squirt guns and ruining your lunch traffic? And she said, high school?
Skin tags.
So I had no idea, but I do think that that there was not a good transition there, and I'm to blame.
So I have to say, encountering a Thurber cartoon in person is a otherworldly experience too, since they were huge, they were weird, they were on the wall, they were on cardboard,
yes,
they were black, white chalk on black paper. I mean, it's amazing what he did to get an image, on paper or anywhere.
If you have a chance to go, you can make an appointment at Ohio State University, and you can go in the rare books and archives. And, some of the pieces early on are, they're on 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper, or they're on little, notepads. But eventually, they get to poster size, and they get to be done in grease pencil and chalk on black paper. And I mean, there was a definite desire that he did not want to give up doing this work. And he often tells the story, as does Rosemary, his daughter, that, after he lost all of his sight in the early 50s, he could still draw. And there's a famous Life magazine photo essay in which he's using a light pen,
right,
and drawing a Thurber dog in the air. And Rosemary, or her mother, would dot the eyeball. They would make the eyeball because he could make a contour line to make the entire dog, but have no sense of where would the eye be in relationship to that.
Wow. Well, Michael, we want to thank you for staying with us. Hope this wasn't too painful.
No.
I don't want to keep any longer, but this has all been really fascinating, and you've been a wonderful guest.
Thank you so much. It's an
honor. Thank you, Mr. Rosen.
It's an honor, gentlemen. I mean, I feel like I was able to brandish the Thurber flag.
I felt like Alistair Cook there for just a second.
Did you?
Yeah. So,
that's actually, if you can find it, I mean, it's there on YouTube. The interview from Omnibus of Alistair and James is really something.
I watched it 17 times in the Thurber house and I couldn't get out, so.
That's right. Thank you again, both.
Thank you.
And I just want to thank all the listeners. A really quick shout out. Jason Chatfield has a new book out called You're Not a Real Parent Until. A plug for my own magazine, The Bob. It's a Substack newsletter that's getting a lot of traction. Sarah Silverman and other people have been subscribing, so check that out. And again, until next time, thanks a lot. Michael, Marty,
thanks, Bob. Thanks, Marty.